On a clear Saturday morning in October 1995, 32-year-old Tanya Brooks Ellison fell to her death from a rocky overlook at Pine Ridge State Park in western North Carolina. Her husband, Marcus Ellison, stood crying at the trailhead when rangers arrived, explaining through sobs that his wife had slipped while posing for photographs. The medical examiner, overworked and understaffed in a rural county with limited resources, ruled the death accidental. Marcus collected $793,000 in life insurance money 4 months later. For 5 years, he lived quietly in Atlanta, Georgia. He purchased a modest townhouse in the Cascade neighborhood, worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company, and kept to himself. He attended a local church occasionally, nodded politely to neighbors, and never spoke about his late wife unless asked. To anyone who knew him, Marcus Ellison was simply a widower who had moved on with dignity and restraint. But Tanya's older brother, Caleb Johnson, never believed the official story. He knew his sister was an experienced hiker who had grown up exploring those same mountain trails. He knew she was careful, methodical, and would never wear inappropriate footwear on a challenging path. Most of all, he knew Marcus had been desperate for money in the months before her death. Yet, without evidence, Caleb could do nothing but watch Marcus walk free while his sister lay buried in a Charlotte cemetery. Then, in the autumn of 2000, during a routine trail maintenance project at Pine Ridge State Park, a construction worker's shovel struck something buried beneath years of decomposed leaves and twisted roots. What he pulled from the earth would unravel Marcus Ellison's carefully constructed life and prove that sometimes the smallest overlooked detail can speak louder than any confession. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Marcus Ellison grew up in the working-class neighborhoods of East Charlotte, the youngest of 3 children raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a textile factory. He was bright enough to graduate high school with decent grades, but never pursued college. Instead, he bounced between jobs throughout his 20s, working warehouse positions, driving delivery trucks, and spending several years as a forklift operator at a distribution center off Interstate 85. In 1992, at a community barbecue in the Greer Heights neighborhood, Marcus met Tanya Brooks. She was 26 years old, a registered nurse at Carolina's Medical Center and known among her family as someone with a generous heart and an infectious laugh. Tanya had grown up hiking the Appalachian foothills with her father and older brother Caleb, developing a deep love for North Carolina's mountains and forests. She was careful, grounded, and practical in ways that seemed to balance Marcus's more impulsive nature. They married in the spring of 1993 in a small ceremony at her family's church. For the first year, things appeared stable. Tanya worked long shifts in the emergency department while Marcus held down his warehouse job. They rented a small apartment in the Plaza Midwood area and talked about eventually buying a house, maybe starting a family. But by early 1994, cracks began to show. Marcus had developed a gambling problem that he kept hidden from his wife. What started as occasional trips to an underground poker game in a basement off Central Avenue escalated into regular visits to an unlicensed betting operation run out of a pool hall near the airport. Marcus convinced himself he could win back his losses, that one good night would erase the debts piling up in secret. By the summer of 1995, Marcus owed nearly $42,000 to people who did not accept excuses or payment plans. He received warnings, then threats. One evening in July, 2 men approached him in the warehouse parking lot after his shift and made it clear what would happen if he didn't pay within 60 days. Marcus went home that night and stared at the ceiling, calculating options he didn't have. That was when he remembered the conversation he'd had months earlier with a coworker named Devin Hayes, who worked in the warehouse administrative office. Devin had mentioned, almost in passing, how life insurance policies could be surprisingly easy to obtain if you knew someone who could help with the paperwork. Marcus had brushed it off at the time, but now the idea took root. In early August 1995, Marcus approached Devon during a lunch break. He explained his situation carefully, testing how far Devon might be willing to go. Devon was younger, barely 24, and needed money himself. After several conversations, they made an arrangement. Devon had access to a photocopier and basic office supplies. More importantly, he was willing to forge Tanya's signature on an insurance application in exchange for $5,000 once the policy was active. Over the next 3 weeks, they worked carefully. Marcus filled out an application for a life insurance policy through a company that operated primarily through mail order forms, minimizing face-to-face verification. The policy amount was set at $793,000, with Marcus as the sole beneficiary. Devon forged Tanya's signature on the application and the required medical disclosure forms. They submitted everything through the mail in mid-August. The insurance company, a mid-sized firm based in Richmond, Virginia, processed the application with minimal scrutiny. Tanya was young, healthy, and employed as a nurse, making her an ideal low-risk candidate. The company never conducted an in-person interview or verification. The policy became active on September 12, 1995. Marcus made the first premium payment from his warehouse paycheck, careful to intercept any mail from the insurance company before Tanya could see it. Now he had the financial motive in place. What he needed was an opportunity that would look unquestionably accidental. Pine Ridge State Park was located roughly 90 miles northwest of Charlotte, a sprawling wilderness area known for its waterfalls, dense forests, and challenging hiking trails. Tanya had been there dozens of times throughout her life, often with her father and brother before her father passed away in 1991. She knew the terrain well and had mentioned to Marcus several times that she wanted to return, that the mountains always helped her think clearly. In late September, Marcus suggested they take a weekend trip to Pine Ridge. He framed it as a chance to reconnect, to escape the stress of their work schedules and the lingering tension he claimed was affecting their marriage. Tanya agreed immediately, excited at the prospect of returning to a place that held so many good memories. They left Charlotte early on Saturday morning, October 14, 1995, driving Marcus's older model Toyota Camry northwest through the foothills. Tanya brought her hiking boots, a backpack with water and snacks, and a disposable camera she'd purchased at a drugstore the night before. She wanted to capture photos of the fall foliage, which was reaching peak color across the mountains. They arrived at Pine Ridge around 10:30 that morning. The park was moderately busy with weekend visitors, but the trails themselves were quiet once you moved away from the main overlooks and picnic areas. Marcus had studied a trail map earlier that week, identifying a specific location that would serve his purpose: Hawthorne Point, a rocky outcrop that jutted out over a steep ravine roughly 200 feet above a creek bed. The trail to Hawthorne Point was marked as difficult, requiring careful footing along narrow paths with loose gravel and exposed roots. Tanya was thrilled. She laced up her hiking boots, adjusted her backpack, and led the way toward the Hawthorne Point Trail for the best views. Marcus followed, forcing enthusiasm into his voice while his mind raced through what needed to happen. They began hiking around 11 that morning. The trail wound upward through thick stands of oak and pine, the forest floor covered in layers of orange and yellow leaves. Tanya walked ahead, pointing out landmarks she remembered from previous visits, noting different bird calls her father had taught her to recognize. Marcus followed, keeping his breathing steady, waiting for the right moment. The hike took nearly an hour. As they climbed higher, the trail narrowed, becoming rockier and more exposed. They passed two other hikers heading back down, exchanging brief greetings before continuing upward. By 12:15, they reached Hawthorne Point. The overlook was exactly as Marcus had seen in the park brochure: a flat expanse of granite jutting outward, surrounded by low shrubs and scrub pine, with nothing but air and a sheer drop beyond the edge. A weathered wooden railing marked the safest viewing area, but the rock extended another 15 feet past the railing toward the cliff's edge. The view was spectacular, stretching across miles of forested ridges and valleys. Tanya immediately walked toward the railing, breathing in the mountain air, smiling in a way Marcus hadn't seen in months. She pulled out her disposable camera and gestured for Marcus to take a photo of her at the trail entrance sign. He did, forcing his hands to stay steady. She took a photo of the waterfall visible in the distance, then another of the valley below. Then she walked past the railing, out toward the edge of the rock, wanting a better angle for a final photograph. She turned back toward Marcus, camera in hand, motioning for him to come closer so she could get a shot with both of them and the view behind. Marcus walked toward her, every muscle tense, his heart hammered in his chest. This was the moment he had planned for, the moment that would solve all his problems or destroy his life entirely. Tanya turned her back to the cliff edge, positioning herself for the photo. She raised the camera to her eye, adjusting the frame. Marcus stepped closer. He could see the drop behind her, the empty space where the rock ended and gravity took over. His mind screamed at him to stop, to find another way. But the image of those men in the parking lot flashed through his head, along with the mounting debt and the impossible situation he'd created. He reached forward with both hands. Tanya must have sensed something in that split second before contact. She lowered the camera slightly, her expression starting to shift from concentration to confusion. But Marcus's hands were already moving, connecting with her shoulders, pushing hard and fast. She stumbled backward, her feet scrambling for purchase on the smooth granite. Her arms windmilled, the camera flying from her hand. For a terrible fraction of a second, her eyes locked onto Marcus's, and he saw complete betrayal and disbelief written across her face. Then she was gone, disappearing over the edge with a sharp cry that was cut short by the impact below. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the empty space where his wife had been standing seconds before. His breathing came in ragged gasps. His hands trembled violently. For several long moments he couldn't move, couldn't think, could only stare at the cliff edge while his mind tried to process what he'd just done. Then survival instinct kicked in. He stumbled backward from the edge, looking around frantically to see if anyone had witnessed what happened. The overlook was empty. The forest was silent except for wind moving through the pine branches. Marcus forced himself to think. He had to call for help. He had to act like a devastated husband who had just watched his wife fall. He ran back down the trail, moving fast but not too fast, his mind racing through the story he would tell. She wanted a photo. She went too close to the edge. She slipped. He tried to grab her but missed. The story had to be simple, consistent, believable. He reached the main park area 15 minutes later and found a ranger station near the parking lot. He burst through the door, gasping, his face flushed from running and genuine panic. A park ranger named William Foster looked up from his desk, immediately standing at the sight of Marcus's distress. Marcus barely got the words out between gasps. His wife had fallen. Hawthorne Point. She went over the edge. They needed help immediately. Ranger Foster radioed for emergency response and grabbed a medical kit. 2 other rangers joined them, and they headed up the trail at a run. Marcus led them back, forcing himself to cry, to act destroyed. By the time they reached Hawthorne Point, his performance was complete. The rangers carefully approached the cliff edge and looked down. One of them radioed for additional support and rope equipment. Tanya's body was visible at the base of the ravine, motionless among the rocks and creek water. There was no question she was dead. The fall had been too far, the landing too violent. It took another 40 minutes for the recovery team to arrive with proper equipment. Marcus sat on a boulder near the trail, head in his hands, while rangers asked him preliminary questions. He stuck to his story. They were taking photos. She wanted a better angle. She went past the railing. She slipped. It happened so fast. He couldn't reach her in time. The rangers took notes but didn't press hard. This was a tragic accident at a dangerous overlook, not the first, and certainly not the last. One ranger did note that Tanya had been wearing light canvas sneakers rather than hiking boots, which seemed odd for such a challenging trail, but he recorded it as an observation rather than a red flag. By late afternoon, Tanya's body had been recovered and transported to the Rutherford County Medical Examiner's office. Marcus was driven back to the parking lot by a park ranger who expressed condolences and offered to help him contact family. Marcus said he would make the calls himself. He drove back to Charlotte in a daze, his mind oscillating between horror at what he'd done and desperate hope that his story would hold. When he arrived home that evening, he called Caleb Johnson and delivered the news through tears that were partly genuine. Tanya had fallen at Pine Ridge. She was gone. It was a terrible, senseless accident. The medical examiner in Rutherford County was named Dr. Raymond Phillips, a 63-year-old physician who had been serving the county for nearly 30 years. His office was chronically underfunded, handling deaths across a wide rural area with minimal staff and outdated equipment. When Tanya's body arrived, Dr. Phillips conducted an external examination and determined that the cause of death was consistent with a fall from significant height, multiple blunt force trauma, severed spinal cord, massive internal bleeding. The investigation was perfunctory. A detective from the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department named Gary Westbrook interviewed Marcus 2 days after the incident. Marcus repeated his story with appropriate grief and detail. Detective Westbrook reviewed the ranger reports, noted the tragic accident determination, and saw no evidence suggesting anything other than what Marcus described. The case was documented and filed. Dr. Phillips signed the death certificate on October 18, 1995, listing the manner of death as accidental. There was no autopsy ordered, no forensic analysis of the scene, no reason to suspect foul play. Within a week, Tanya Brooks Ellison's death was officially closed as a hiking accident. Marcus attended the funeral at Tanya's family church in Charlotte, accepting condolences with appropriate sorrow. Caleb Johnson stood nearby, watching his brother-in-law with barely concealed suspicion. Something about Marcus's demeanor felt wrong, performative, but Caleb had no evidence, no proof, nothing but an instinct that refused to be silenced. In January 1996, Marcus submitted the death certificate and required paperwork to the life insurance company. After a standard review period, they issued a check for $793,000. Marcus deposited it into a new account at a different bank, paid Devin Hayes the promised $5,000, and began systematically paying off his gambling debts. By March, his debts were cleared. By summer, he had purchased the townhouse in Atlanta and relocated, claiming he needed a fresh start away from painful memories. He took a job as a logistics coordinator at a shipping company, kept a low profile, and never gambled again. For 5 years, Marcus Ellison lived with what he'd done, believing he had committed the perfect crime. Marcus's life in Atlanta was defined by careful routine and deliberate invisibility. He worked 40 hours a week at the shipping company, maintained a clean and modest lifestyle, and avoided any behavior that might draw attention. He never spoke about the insurance money, instead claiming his townhouse was purchased through savings and a good mortgage. Neighbors knew him as quiet and polite, but fundamentally unremarkable. The townhouse itself was a 2-bedroom unit in the Cascade neighborhood, a middle-class area with tree-lined streets and modest homes. Marcus furnished it simply: a couch, a television, a bed, basic kitchen appliances. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy. The insurance money sat in multiple accounts, carefully distributed to avoid suspicion, slowly earning interest while Marcus lived off his salary. He established a rigid daily routine that became his anchor. Wake at 6:30, coffee and toast. Drive to work by 7:30. Lunch at his desk. Home by 5:15. Microwave dinner. Television until 10. Bed, repeat. The monotony was intentional, a way to occupy his mind and prevent thinking too deeply about what he'd done. Psychologically, the act of killing his wife had not left Marcus unscathed. He experienced nightmares regularly, waking in the dark with Tanya's final expression burned into his memory. The moment her eyes met his, the instant before she fell, replayed endlessly in his sleep. He would jolt awake at 2 or 3 in the morning, heart racing, sheets soaked with sweat. During the day, he pushed these images away through rigid routine and deliberate distraction. He told himself it had been necessary, that he'd had no choice, that her death had saved his life from the people he owed. These justifications helped during daylight hours, but they never fully erased the weight of what he'd done. At night, the justifications meant nothing. At night, he saw only Tanya's face and the emptiness where she'd been standing. He attended Greater Cascade Presbyterian Church occasionally, sitting in the back row and leaving immediately after services. He never joined groups or made close friends. He dated briefly in 1998, meeting a woman named Patricia through work. They went to dinner 3 times before she began asking questions about his past, about his previous marriage, about why he'd moved to Atlanta. Marcus ended things after the 4th date, claiming he wasn't ready for a relationship. The truth was that any intimate connection threatened the carefully maintained walls he'd built around his secret. Isolation became his primary defense mechanism. He interacted with coworkers professionally, but never socialized after hours. He declined invitations to barbecues, holiday parties, and casual gatherings. People eventually stopped asking, accepting that Marcus Ellison preferred solitude. This suited him perfectly. Solitude meant no probing questions, no risk of slipping up, no chance someone might notice inconsistencies in his carefully rehearsed history. The money itself remained largely untouched. Marcus had distributed it across 4 different bank accounts at different institutions, never keeping more than $200,000 in any single location. He earned modest interest, but made no significant withdrawals beyond the initial debt payments. The townhouse had been his one major purchase, carefully structured to appear within his salary range through a conventional mortgage and claimed savings. Living frugally was its own form of discipline. Marcus could have afforded a much nicer home, a new car, expensive vacations, but any conspicuous spending might raise questions, might cause someone to wonder about his finances. So he drove his aging Camry, bought clothes from discount retailers, and lived like someone earning $38,000 a year rather than someone sitting on over $700,000 in hidden assets. This discipline extended to every aspect of his life. He paid bills on time but never early. He filed taxes accurately. He maintained his credit score in the average range, neither exceptional nor poor. He was, by design, utterly forgettable. Back in North Carolina, Caleb Johnson never stopped believing his sister's death was murder. He kept copies of every document related to her case in a thick folder at his home in Charlotte. The folder contained the original police report, the medical examiner's ruling, photographs from the funeral, newspaper clippings about the accident, and his own handwritten notes documenting his suspicions. Caleb called the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department twice in 1996, asking if they'd investigated Marcus's finances or the timing of the insurance policy. Detective Westbrook, who had handled the initial investigation, assured Caleb that everything had been thoroughly reviewed and there was no evidence of foul play. The tone was patient but firm. They had investigated, found nothing suspicious, and the case was closed. But Caleb's persistent calls planted a seed. In late 1997, Detective Westbrook mentioned the case to a colleague who worked in the district attorney's office, noting that the victim's brother remained convinced it was murder, despite the accidental ruling. The colleague made a note in a file of potentially questionable deaths that might warrant future review if new evidence ever emerged. That file eventually made its way to Detective Simone Carter. Detective Carter joined the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department in 1994 after earning her criminal justice degree from UNC Charlotte. She distinguished herself quickly as thorough and persistent, someone who noticed small details other investigators missed. By 1999, she had been promoted to the detective division and assigned to a newly formed cold case review team. The team's mandate was to examine unsolved murders and suspicious deaths using modern forensic techniques and fresh perspectives. In April 2000, Detective Carter began reviewing a batch of files from surrounding counties, looking for cases that might benefit from renewed investigation. The files came from various departments, cases that had gone cold or been closed with ambiguous conclusions. Tanya Brooks Ellison's file caught her attention immediately. The death had been ruled accidental, but certain details didn't align properly when Carter read through the reports with fresh eyes. Marcus's initial statement to Rangers claimed Tanya was wearing her hiking boots that day, but Ranger Foster's incident report specifically described light canvas sneakers, blue and white, worn condition. This discrepancy seemed minor, but it nagged at Carter. Why would an experienced hiker wear inappropriate footwear on a difficult trail? And why would Marcus remember it differently? Carter pulled financial records through legal channels and discovered the life insurance policy. $793,000, taken out just 2 months before Tanya's death. The policy had been processed through mail order with minimal verification. Carter requested the original application documents and immediately noticed irregularities in the signatures. The handwriting analysis came back conclusive. Tanya's signature had been forged. This changed everything. Carter now had evidence of fraud directly connected to a suspicious death. She located Devin Hayes, who still worked at the same Charlotte warehouse where Marcus had been employed. Under initial questioning, Devin was evasive. But when Carter explained he could face charges as an accessory to murder if he didn't cooperate, Devin admitted his role in forging the documents. He provided detailed testimony about Marcus's desperation and their arrangement, confirming that Marcus had orchestrated the fraudulent policy without Tanya's knowledge. Now, Carter had motive and means. What she lacked was proof that the death itself was intentional rather than accidental. A forged insurance policy suggested intent, but it wasn't definitive proof of murder. Marcus could argue he'd taken out the policy separately from the accident, that the two events weren't connected despite the suspicious timing. Carter requested that the case be officially reopened in June 2000, receiving approval from her supervisor to pursue additional investigation. She contacted Rutherford County and arranged to review all physical evidence from the scene, hoping something had been overlooked. The evidence box contained little: photographs of the scene, Tanya's clothing and personal effects, the initial ranger reports, and Dr. Phillips's examination notes. Nothing pointed definitively toward murder. Carter drove to Pine Ridge State Park in July 2000, walking the Hawthorne Point Trail herself and examining the overlook where Tanya had died. She took photographs, measured distances, and tried to understand the physical dynamics of what had happened. Could someone actually slip accidentally from that point? Yes, possibly. Could someone be pushed? Also, yes. The ambiguity was frustrating. She interviewed the rangers who had responded that day, but their memories had faded over 5 years. They remembered Marcus as distraught and cooperative, his story consistent throughout. Nothing had seemed suspicious at the time. Carter felt the case stalling. She had strong evidence of insurance fraud, but only circumstantial evidence suggesting murder. She needed something concrete, something that definitively proved Marcus had pushed Tanya rather than watched her slip. Without it, a prosecutor might not take the case to trial. Meanwhile, at Pine Ridge State Park, routine maintenance was about to reveal something extraordinary. In September 2000, park maintenance crews began a trail renovation project along the Hawthorne Point path. The trail had deteriorated over 5 years of weather and heavy foot traffic, requiring significant work to reinforce eroded sections and clear overgrown vegetation. Funding had finally been allocated for the improvements, and crews started work on September 18th. On September 22nd, a maintenance worker named Thomas Ridley was using a pickaxe to break up compacted soil near the base of a large oak tree, roughly 30 feet from the Hawthorne Point overlook. The area was off the main trail, a spot where water runoff had created erosion problems. As he pried at a cluster of exposed roots, his tool struck something solid and plastic beneath the soil. Curious, Ridley set down his pickaxe and knelt in the dirt. He dug carefully with his gloved hands, pulling away layers of decomposed leaves, packed earth, and root tendrils. What emerged was a disposable camera, heavily weathered and covered in mud. The yellow and green plastic casing was cracked along one edge, and moisture had clearly penetrated the interior. The cardboard label was completely degraded, but the basic structure of the camera remained intact. Ridley stood up, turning the camera over in his hands. It was clearly old, not something recently dropped by a visitor. The burial depth and degree of weathering suggested it had been there for years. He showed it to his supervisor, Gerald Hawkins, who examined it briefly and decided to turn it over to park authorities. It might be evidence related to a past incident, or it might help identify a visitor who had lost property years ago. The park ranger on duty that afternoon was Patricia Mills, who had worked at Pine Ridge for 8 years. She took the camera, documented where it had been found, and filed a report. The location was close to Hawthorne Point, where that tragic hiking accident had occurred back in 1995. Mills remembered the incident vaguely, a woman falling to her death while her husband watched. She made a note of the connection and contacted local law enforcement to report the recovered property. The report was routed through standard channels and eventually reached Detective Carter's desk because it mentioned Hawthorne Point in the 1995 incident. When Carter read the report on September 26th, her pulse quickened. A disposable camera found buried near the scene of Tanya Ellison's death. The timing seemed impossible, almost too perfect, but she immediately requested the camera be transferred to the Charlotte, Mecklenburg Police Department's forensic unit. The camera arrived at the forensics lab on September 28, 2000. The lead analyst, Dr. Layla Ferguson, was a specialist in photo and document forensics with nearly 15 years of experience. She examined the camera carefully under proper lighting, noting the exterior damage and the condition of the internal film canister. The plastic casing had cracked, allowing moisture penetration, but the metal film canister itself appeared intact, though heavily corroded around the edges. Dr. Ferguson had worked with damaged film before and believed there was a reasonable chance some images might be recoverable. The question was whether anything remained that hadn't been completely destroyed by 5 years of exposure to moisture, temperature fluctuations, and soil microorganisms. She took the camera into the department's darkroom, a sealed room with specialized lighting and chemical processing equipment. Working carefully, she pried open the damaged casing and extracted the film canister. The exterior showed significant corrosion, but the seal had held partially intact. She opened the canister in complete darkness, using only touch to guide her movements. The film strip was warped and showed obvious water damage when she examined it under red, safe light. Most of the frames appeared completely blackened or had separated emulsion, the photographic layer literally peeling away from the base. But the frames in the center of the roll, protected by the outer layers, showed some preservation. Dr. Ferguson began the delicate process of developing what remained. She used specialized techniques for damaged film, adjusting chemical concentrations and processing times to maximize recovery. She worked frame by frame, carefully examining each image as it emerged in the developer tray. Most revealed nothing but murky gray or complete blackness. But 3 frames, positioned in the center of the roll where they'd been most protected, showed recognizable images. When Dr. Ferguson hung the developed photographs to dry under controlled conditions, she immediately recognized their significance. She stood in the darkroom, staring at the images for several long minutes, understanding that what she was looking at could reopen a closed case and potentially prove murder. The first photo showed a young black woman smiling at a trail entrance sign, the words Hawthorne Point Trail visible behind her. The image quality was poor, faded and grainy with water staining along the edges, but the woman's face was recognizable. Her expression was happy, relaxed, completely unaware of what was coming. The second photo showed the same woman standing with her back partially to the camera, a waterfall visible in the misty distance. This image was even more degraded. The colors washed out to near monochrome, but the composition was clear enough. The third photo was the one that changed everything. The image was taken from a slightly elevated angle, suggesting it had been held at chest height or slightly above. It showed the woman standing at the edge of a rocky overlook, her back toward a visible drop-off. The exposure was imperfect, slightly overexposed on the right side where bright sky dominated, but the central composition was clear enough to see critical details. The woman stood with her back near the cliff edge, her posture relaxed and upright. She was holding something in her hands, likely the camera itself before it had been dropped or thrown. Behind her, and slightly to the left, closer to where the photographer would have been standing, stood a man. He was taller, wearing dark clothing that appeared to be a jacket and jeans. His face was partially obscured by poor image quality and motion blur, but his body position was unmistakable. His right arm was extended forward, captured in mid-motion toward the woman. The gesture was clear, not reaching out defensively or trying to steady himself, but pushing forward with deliberate force and intention. The arm angle, the body mechanics, the direction of movement all pointed to one action. He was pushing her. Dr. Ferguson documented the image thoroughly before calling Detective Carter. She photographed the negative in print from multiple angles, noting the damage patterns and preservation conditions. She recorded technical details about the film type, manufacture date range based on the camera model, and likely burial duration based on degradation patterns. Everything pointed to this being a camera from 1995, buried for approximately 5 years. Detective Carter arrived at the forensics lab within an hour of Dr. Ferguson's call. When she saw the third photograph, she felt her entire case crystallize into certainty. This wasn't just evidence. This was proof. She immediately compared the woman in the photographs to Tanya Ellison's driver's license photo and victim photographs from 1995. The facial features, hairstyle, build, and clothing matched. This was Tanya Ellison. She reviewed the date stamps and camera manufacturer information with Dr. Ferguson. The camera model had been widely available in the early to mid-1990s, with this specific version produced between 1993 and 1996. The film type was Kodak Gold 400, a common consumer film from that era. The image quality, color shifts, and degradation patterns were all consistent with film exposed in 1995 and buried for 5 years in forest soil conditions. Most importantly, the third photograph directly contradicted Marcus Ellison's account of the incident. He had claimed Tanya slipped while posing for photos and that he tried unsuccessfully to reach her. This image showed his arm extended in a pushing motion while Tanya stood unaware at the cliff edge, still holding the camera. The sequence suggested she had been taking photos, had perhaps just taken this shot using the camera's self-timer or by accident, and then Marcus had pushed her immediately afterward. The camera had either been dropped during the push or thrown aside, landing off the trail where it became buried under accumulating leaves and soil. Detective Carter now had motive, means, opportunity, and photographic evidence of the crime itself. But she wanted more than evidence. She wanted a confession. If she arrested Marcus immediately based on the photograph, he would lawyer up and say nothing. His attorney would attack the image quality, argue about ambiguity, claim it didn't definitively prove intent. A good defense lawyer might even suggest Marcus was reaching out to help rather than pushing. Carter needed Marcus to incriminate himself before he understood the full weight of what had been discovered. She needed him to feel safe, to make mistakes, to contradict his original story in ways that could be used at trial. She developed a strategy carefully over the next 2 weeks. She would contact Marcus under a neutral pretext, something administrative that wouldn't raise alarms. She would bring him in for what appeared to be routine follow-up, then systematically walk him through his story, looking for contradictions. Only after he'd committed to his version of events would she reveal the photograph. On October 17, 2000, Detective Carter called Marcus Ellison at his home in Atlanta. She identified herself as working with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department on administrative matters related to his late wife's case. She explained that some property had been recovered at Pine Ridge State Park during renovation work, and they needed him to review documentation to confirm whether it had any connection to his wife's belongings or the incident in 1995. Her tone was professional and bureaucratic, giving no indication this was anything but routine administrative closure. Marcus agreed to come to Charlotte the following week. He had no reason to suspect danger. 5 years had passed, the case was closed, the insurance money was spent. He believed himself untouchable, that whatever evidence might have existed was long gone. On October 24, 2000, Marcus Ellison arrived at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department headquarters on East Trade Street. He had driven from Atlanta that morning, wearing khaki pants and a button-down shirt, looking like any professional taking time from work for an administrative errand. Detective Carter met him in the lobby at 2 in the afternoon, shook his hand, and led him to an interview room on the second floor. The room was small and windowless, containing only a metal table and 3 chairs. The walls were painted institutional beige, and fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Carter offered Marcus coffee, which he accepted, and she returned with a styrofoam cup filled with black coffee from the break room. She sat down across from him with a folder containing various documents spread before her. A video camera mounted in the corner recorded everything, though Marcus didn't notice it or think to ask about recording. Carter began with simple, non-threatening questions. How was he doing? How was life in Atlanta treating him? How long had he been with his current employer? Marcus answered easily, his demeanor relaxed. She expressed sympathy for the tragedy he'd experienced, noting how difficult it must have been to lose his wife so suddenly and in such a traumatic way. Marcus responded appropriately, his answers polished by 5 years of practice and repetition. Then Carter shifted direction. She explained that as part of closing out old files, they were reviewing the documentation of Tanya's accident to ensure everything was properly archived. She asked if he would be willing to walk her through the events of that day one more time, just to ensure the records were complete and accurate. Marcus saw no danger in this request. He'd told the story dozens of times. It was consistent, rehearsed, solid. He repeated his practiced narrative carefully. They had driven to Pine Ridge that morning for a weekend getaway. Tanya loved hiking and had been excited to return to trails she remembered from childhood. They hiked to Hawthorne Point around midday. The account he described followed the same orderly sequence he had repeated for years, a routine retelling shaped and refined by repetition until it felt almost polished. He spoke, steadily, maintaining a calm rhythm as he recounted the approach to the overlook, the way the forest canopy thinned near the summit, the distant sound of moving water, the autumn wind settling across the exposed rock. He emphasized how Tanya had been enthusiastic, how she had moved quickly along the path and paused often to take photographs. He described the scenery, the height of the cliff, and the bright sky that had framed the ridge. Marcus explained that they reached the overlook and stepped beyond the railing to enjoy the view. He described Tanya's eagerness to capture the colors of the valley below, and the way she lifted her camera toward the distant waterfall. He repeated the familiar sequence of events leading to the alleged slip, maintaining an even tone as he recounted the moment she stepped backward toward the granite edge, and the way her feet lost traction on the smooth surface. He described watching her fall, how helpless he felt, how quickly everything unfolded, and how he reacted in panic afterward. His posture remained steady as he spoke, his hands resting motionless against the table. Detective Carter allowed him to finish the entire account uninterrupted. She observed the slight changes in his expression, the rigid control in his shoulders, and the practiced neutrality in his gaze. She waited until he had fully committed himself to every detail he had rehearsed over the years. When he reached the end of his narrative, she shifted through the documents before her in a measured sequence, creating a deliberate sense of progression that settled into the room like a slow, tightening weight. She retrieved the printed photographs developed from the recovered camera and placed them in a structured order. Marcus watched her movements without suspicion, unaware of what the images contained. She arranged them in a manner that reflected the progression of Tanya's final morning, constructing a silent chronology that began with her smiling at the trail entrance. The second image displayed her near the distant waterfall, her posture relaxed and unaware of danger. The third image, degraded yet unmistakable, captured the critical moment that contradicted everything Marcus had ever claimed. The photograph revealed the unmistakable motion of his arm extended toward Tanya at the cliff edge, the physical angle conveying deliberate force rather than accident. The framing of the shot preserved the final moment before the fall, with an unintentional clarity created by the camera's position and the suddenness of what occurred. The environmental damage to the film had not obscured the essential truth. The image existed as an irrefutable record of the act itself, preserved beneath soil and roots long enough to surface only when circumstances aligned years later. When the sequence of photographs was complete, the evidence formed a comprehensive reconstruction of the final seconds before Tanya fell. The recovered camera served as a silent witness that had waited beneath the forest floor until the moment it could speak through the preserved frames. The weight of this discovery transformed the case from circumstantial suspicion into definitive proof, linking motive, deception, and action into a unified chain of events. Carter documented Marcus S.'s reactions carefully as he absorbed the implications of what had been presented. His expression shifted in increments, his practiced composure weakening beneath the realization that the past had resurfaced in a physical form he had never anticipated. The years he spent believing the evidence had vanished had shielded him with a false sense of safety. Now, with the truth exposed through the lens of a forgotten camera, the collapse of that illusion unfolded silently in his demeanor. The formal charges were processed in the hours that followed. The case transitioned from dormant speculation to an active prosecution supported by physical evidence, financial records, forged documents, and the recovered film. The discovery at Pine Ridge restored the narrative of Tanya S.'s final hours and dismantled the facade Marcus had constructed. The conclusion of the investigation marked the end of the years he had spent living in deliberate anonymity, and the truth that had been buried beneath the forest floor rose to determine his fate.